So I go from script to thumbnails. So here are the thumbnails. The script would just have the dialogue because I know sort of where the scene is taking place, where they're going, what they're doing. Sometimes I would write down the action for the scene if there's something specific that I think I know I'll forget. But otherwise, going down the dialogue, usually in a scene, there's like a few parts that are pretty, um, like in focus. So the dialogue leads to it, like the critical point of the conversation, even if it's about something mundane, and then leads away from it. Those are the easiest panels to draw. In the past, I would draw from beginning to end, but these days I realize that whatever I have a clear mental image of, I would draw that first. So in this case, they were talking, and this is the part where they say something important, and there's a few beats of her saying a few things, but it has to show like her expression and her reaction. And so I would do something like I draw out these few parts first, uh, and then I lead up to it because it's a lot easier to think, okay, the camera has to be here now. What is the process to smoothly go from wherever I was down to this part? So that helps me decide the previous few panels and then the next few panels. And as you can see in the end, I ended up going like sort of a shot of both of them to set up a scene, like where they are, what they're wearing, what they're like, what their dynamic right now is like, and then I would like zoom out to show where they are. Not so much here, I guess. I needed to show them walking down a ramp, which is pretty hard to frame, and then I zoom in on them a bit, and then I zoom in on them more, and then I zoom back out after they're done talking to include the change of scene, and then again I zoom into wherever that's necessary. So that's the flow of like how I decide where in general the camera is. When it comes to specifically in each panel, it's important to know what you need to show. Most of the time, it's important to show characters' expressions or their body language, their reaction, their uh, choices in expressing whatever that they're saying, how they feel and stuff. And it's easy to think that you can basically do this for every panel because every panel that somebody says something, you can show something about how they express themselves. And it's very easy to draw a portrait compared to, say, a full far away shot. But you also have to think about, does it add or take away anything? Or, well, I think about, does it add or take away anything if I include other elements? So let's say this panel here, I needed to show her talking about something important, and this is all about how she says it. That's why I made such a close shot. But if I made it like a far away shot so that I can include her reaction, let's say like something like this, so I can include her reaction in this same scene, then suddenly you sort of have to look at both of them while you're supposed to be focusing on what she's saying and how she's saying it. So this confuses the viewer as to what they're supposed to pay attention to. And so I decided to drag it out and make it one panel and then next panel, so that you tell the viewers like, hey, look at this right now, look at this right now, and then look at this right now, and then look at this again, because you are thinking about, okay, what is she looking at, or how is she looking at the other person. So in that case, here is how I chose to neglect or remove everything else. No backgrounds, no other characters in the surroundings, just a focus on a single character. But you can't do this all the time because it loses the viewer in like where they are, because if the entire story is just a bunch of stuff like this, which you see quite often because it's the easiest to draw, as you look at the scene more, you start to just think of them as walking in front of a blank screen. You don't really know which direction they're walking, where they're walking, what they're doing, because you can't even see the rest of their body. And the comic, I find, quickly becomes just like an illustrated facial expression only kind of novel. There's no other visual aspects to it. So setting the scene is important, and it's important to know which spots are expendable to the storytelling to show this set the scene, because when you zoom out you can't see the character very much, and so whatever that has to be expressed through body language, has to be expressed through atmosphere. No faces, not much like details, and there's a lot of places that could be used for this. For example, if they're saying something more factual or more detached, or they're saying a bunch of stuff all at once, and you need space for it, which is excellent for these kinds of setup shots, because you inevitably end up with a bunch of empty spaces. Those are pretty good for these kind of shots. So I think about where in between close up to zooming out a little bit more to zooming back into whatever they're saying, and then moving on from the conversation, I can zoom out again. Those are the places that I choose to put these kinds of shots in. You don't have to do this a lot. You could do this a lot, because the more you have of this, the more clear of an image, like exactly where the scenes and stories are taking place, it would be shown to the viewers. But you don't want to do this a lot, because this takes a lot of time to render, and then over time, like just like overdoing this, if you overdo a lot of these background scenes, even if say for instance, this is a good example, I could put background here, like the back wall, and then some ceiling here, because there is space. If I put it here, it would kind of remove the focus from the characters and make it much more like scene setting kind of panel. And so you, instead of looking at the characters and what they're doing, you might look at this and sort of perceive it as, okay, let me look at my surroundings. And you don't, or I think the viewer wouldn't focus on what I want them to look at the most. So sometimes it's good to actually like remove these things. Same thing down here when she's talking to a bunch of people. Again, I could draw in the background, but I want people to look at her and read the conversation. So in these cases, because the characters already take up majority of the space, you don't need to put in the background despite the background giving information, because that is excessive information since you already know where people are in the shot. So yeah, no excessive use of either of these, and then I just basically try to balance what kind of panel from where, from which type to which type for the expression of the scene. And then as for the actual camera angle, like let's say from the top here, this is a bird's eye view. This is sort of a from a lower down perspective, but still like pretty level. And then again, bird's eye view, and then here from a slightly more ant eye view from like closer to their feet. These kind of decisions are I make them based on what I need to be included. So overhead views are best for if you need to tell people where they are, and a lot of the details are on the floor. So in a room or interior, or like they're on the streets or something, when there's a lot of people that you need to show little environment surrounding without showing emphasis on any of them, an overhead view is good because all of these items are clearly spaced out and none of them overtake each other. Like, unlike if you put a sort of eye level view, some of these people are going to end up really big and others small. So this is really good for like setting a scene if they're in the wilderness and you need to show like landscape from far away, then maybe this kind of shot would be better for setting a scene, for example. When I need to show, say, the character speaking order, I might use camera angles to help me make sure that the right person is speaking first. So she is taller than her. So every panel that I draw them both in would end up with her head showing first if I always go for the like eye level view. And if she speaks first, it would be weird because if I would put a speech bubble here, even if I lead it to her face, it would look kind of like it's like this kind of reading order. And so sometimes I use camera angle to like change which face you see first adjacent to your to your reading order. So here she speaks first. Oh no, I lied. Okay. Here she does not speak first, but I like seeing like her her expression like bigger so that it's not like towered by her height. But here again, she speaks first, so I put her height closer to her speech bubble. And then with the this kind of eye level camera angle, especially when there are people closer to the viewer and then people farther away, it helps give many different shapes and sizes of people for you to look at so that it's easier to distinguish them. So here she is separated from everyone else by all of this space, all of this empty space next to her, and then she is clearly in focus because she takes up the most space and she's like framed right in the center of everybody's attention. Everybody's looking at her somehow and pointing at her. And then this allows me to draw other characters without drawing them in their entirety, so that like it's a back view or a silhouette or something, so that people are there, but they are there to be used as shapes to frame the panel without crowding the panel. If I actually made this more of an even shot, like this, you would probably look at all of these people like sort of the same way, and you don't really know what to look at for any of them. There's not many distinctions. They are all quite similar. I would have trouble choosing who to look at in between these two. So this kind of shot is really useful for when there is a clear hierarchy for a bunch of people talking, but one of them is the more important person. And then same thing here, where I use a lot of framing. Like I crop out a lot of the crowds so that the people that I don't want being shown talking can be sort of off the canvas, so that it's easy to know in a panel of a lot of people who is the important person to be looking at. And then at the same time, I have already established who was talking to her in this panel. So like a bunch of people here, you've already seen them in their entirety. You've seen them here drawn out a little bit. So I can think of my think of the crowd as not as important and maybe draw them as just like silhouettes, so that I save time and also get the reader to be looking at her, because at this point, like that's the only person that I want people to look at. Let's see what else. Yeah, and then at the very end or in the very beginning, I try to make sure that I fulfill most of the like foundation rules that I know of for framing and paneling this kind of stuff. So I try to frame the characters with spaces and contrast. So here the empty space contrasting with the details of the character, of course, and then empty space around the character, empty space around the characters, and then empty space around the character to distinguish them, make them easy to see. I try to make sure that I follow the 180-degree rule, sort of. I don't really know it exactly. I've just seen it a couple times, and I try to remember to the best of my ability what it is. So you try not to flip the camera around too many times. Usually, whoever is on one side of the canvas stays on that side of the canvas. So she's on the left and she's on the right. So I make sure that no matter what angle that I put them in, she's always on the left and she's always on the right. From here, top down, left, right. Top down, left, right. Top down, left, right. And then let's say even if I could show her face from this side of the canvas, if I put the camera here, I would not put this here just to show like the crowd or something, because it would flip their left-right order. And then same thing even at the end here, I try to make sure that when she's looking back at the person that was on the left, she looks to the left. It makes it a lot easier for people to keep track who is where they're going. They've always been like sort of walking to the left side of the canvas, especially in an action shot. Staying still like this makes it a lot easier for people to think about what a character is doing. So for instance, if they're fighting a bunch of people like all around them, there's people here, there's people here, she fights these guys first and then fights these guys next. The angle that should be changing should be her rather than the camera, unless the camera is like following her really closely so that it's easy to show all of the actions and stuff. It makes it easier for the reader to keep track of what is happening and where they are, like having an anchor in the set. So even in this kind of simple nothing is happening story, I think it's very helpful to have this kind of stationary thing. And then for other framing, cropping issues, I try not to do stuff like this. So this is not that great, but it's whatever, it's not important. But I try to not cut people off at the joints because that's not good. When I crop a character, if I want the focus to be on the character, I usually crop off the top of their head, and you crop at like in the middle of their limbs or in the middle of their thigh, just not at the elbow, knee, hips, neck. And these are bad spots to crop because it makes them look like they got amputated. Yeah, I think those are everything that I can think of. Oh, and in the very end, like before I even decide what colors to color all of the characters, I think it's very helpful to try to imagine what kind of lighting you would use to fill in these lines. So if you don't think about the lighting, when you draw the characters, when you sketch out your scenes, you might not sketch out a scene that is easy to color, because the scene might look good in all blanks like this with no values added, where the only values are the dark lines. It might seem balanced now, but let's say there's no thought to how I might color this character. I might end up with like a light hair, light clothing character on against a light or like very busy but pastel-y backgrounds, and it actually makes her hard to see. So these are kind of things that you have to keep in mind. You might have a solid sketch with all of those things in mind, but end up having a lot of trouble filling it, even in black and white manga tones kind of thing, making it easy to read. So at the very least, think about in terms of, say, a highlight and a shadow at least. Like, are you going to do this, or are you going to do this? Or is it going to be hard to fill because all of the colors contrast with each other? In which case, do you need to, say, draw a picture frame here, like what I did here? Like, I drew a picture frame on the wall for no reason. When it comes to setting, like, it doesn't matter if there's a picture frame on the wall of this hallway in terms of believability, but it helps me separate her from the background, and it helps me show the viewers where the wall is. In the beginning, there was no frame here, and it looks like you don't know how far they are from the wall, and you don't know if the wall's perspective is like this or this. And then when I color her, she's gonna just blend into the backgrounds, or not at all, because she doesn't cast a shadow on it and you can't really read what's going on. So I added these kind of elements to make it easier for me to paint and show character in relation to the setting. So these kind of small things you can add in the end to help tell the story. In my opinion, it's very important to make your scene believable by setting it up properly first before you draw in the story, because it will be tempting to like draw a bunch of people and then you're like, okay, well, now I have all of this space to fill, what do I put in it? And you try to fit things in it, and it would look really obvious that you are trying to fill in an empty space with useless stuff that you can't quite blend seamlessly into the scene. Whereas if you set up the shot before, at least, like if you need to move some of these things, you can. But if you set up the shot before and you've thought of everything that they need at that moment, you might find it easier to first place the characters in the scene, and then second, space out everything in a compositionally pleasant way without feeling like you're filling the scene with whatever you can think of that might not help. And then on the contrary, some people end up doing this a lot, like they make a complete scene and then they try to put the characters into the scene, and it makes sometimes the items in the scene actually makes it harder for the characters to show up. Or some people think like they're drawing a Victorian house and it has to have like a billion frames on the wall and a lot of little objects here and there, very busy, in order to make it believable. And then that takes away from the characters because they feel like they cannot remove some of these items. When it is your job as the artist to make sure that that doesn't happen. So when setting up the scene, do the planning ahead of time, but always at the end, when if you need to, you have to make the arbitrary decision of like adding stuff where they don't belong, or taking away stuff from your initial plan for the benefit of the composition, because the end goal is always for your panel to be easy to read to the viewers and for the viewers to know what's going on. It doesn't matter if you have to change a character's pose, or it doesn't matter if you are forced to draw a really difficult pose that you don't know how to draw, or draw an angle that you don't understand how to draw. If the scene calls for it, you have to do it. You can't take shortcuts to hide your incompetence, because either way it's going to show up in a poorly done panel. So those are the things that I try my best to do. Like sometimes when I stream the sketching process, people might see me draw the same figure for like 2 hours straight because I can't get it right, instead of trying to shoot the panel from a slightly different angle or like cover it up somehow. That is because of the reason that I just mentioned. So yeah, I think those are all the things that I can come up with. I got a little long, but I hope that was useful.